everyone. Welcome to another episode of Lessons of the Woods by 10 Point Whitetails. I'm your host, Dylan Porter, and with me I have my co-host, Kyle Weber, and we're going to talk to you today about bedding. That is our topic that we've decided to move forward with. Bedding is important to whitetail deer, and there's no other way around it, so we're going to kind of dig deep into that and what you can do to build bedding on your property. So Kyle, I'm going to let you start with that, and we'll see where we end up here.
Sure. So bedding is one of the few points on 10-point whitetails or 10-point system. Bedding is something that you can control, and it takes a lot of sweat equity to do so. You can do a lot of hinge cutting, habitat improvement, stuff like that for the property, and it's something that you can do rather than kind of having to work with what the property has. So at our property, what I did was I located two spots that I thought was ideal for hinge cutting. Hinge cutting, for people that don't know, is when you take a tree, you cut from the back side and you go about halfway through it, but you slowly drop that tree. So that tree's up like this, you cut from the back side and it drops, and it's supposed to go slow. You don't want to cut out the front and have it drop hard. You want to actually, when it drops, to kind of give you a nice curve from, you want to drop the tree horizontally, but you want that nice curve there. The backside will break out and be a mess, but you'll keep that bark and all of that grain attached on the inner side of it. In a perfect world, that tree continues to grow. What you've just done with one hinge cut is you've dropped all of that growth from up in the canopy and put it now down at 4 foot, 5 foot level for the deer. So all of that growth, if that tree continues to grow, is edible food for them at their height. Mm-hmm. Those branches will turn into trees. They'll turn straight and they'll grow up. But as that process grows every spring, as they bud and grow, that's browse. That's natural browse for the deer. And what you've also done is you've put a huge hole in the canopy to allow sunlight down to the dormant seeds and dormant plants and vegetation that are on the ground floor that have been choked out by canopy up until this point. Mm-hmm. So you'll gain all that growth also. And that's two things you've done just by hinge cutting one tree. Yeah, you're providing
a little bit extra food and then a bedding. So it really is going to depend on your wood or on your woods, right? Like where I'm at, we have a variety of tree cover on a piece of property. So we might have oak trees with hazelnut brush. We might have some oak trees with more open area in the middle, popple trees, and then we occasionally have diamond willow swamps. And if the swamps aren't too wet, the deer really like to bed in there because it's a nice thick area. But like where you're at, Kyle, you have a lot of bigger, heavier timber that doesn't let undergrowth exist. So explain how. I think you kind of already explained a little bit, but so when you do a hinge cut, you're creating undergrowth, right?
Yeah. So you're one bringing a screen down, like I mean, we're sitting here right now. If I drop a tree right here, you can't see me. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, like when we got to the property, and Dylan, you've seen it when you visited, you could see 150 yards through the bottom. There was nothing growing. The little saplings that were growing were trying to shoot as high as they could up into the canopy. And when you hinge cut, you've now gotten the sunlight down, so you're getting growth. That canopy of the tree, the top part of it is now growing to create browse, but you're also creating an edge. And anytime a deer gets pressured, they go to the thick. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like a fun word to say for us hunters. They go to the thick stuff because a human cannot walk through the thick better than a deer, quieter than a deer. So that deer gets up in there, he gets nestled up in there real good, puts his back to the edge, and he can see. I don't do it now, but occasionally, one time a year, I'll go into the sanctuaries. I'll find a buck bed or a deer bed, and I'll lay down. I'll get down. I'll get there right where they're at. It's amazing to see what they can see out of that thick area and hunt and watch. They're watching. Mm-hmm. They're going to see you coming a long ways away. But when you do a hinge cut, you do any of this stuff, and you get that regrowth, you create that thick and you create an edge, you create that bedding, you create that safe space. And what I did at the land was I specifically picked 2 spots. The hinge cut areas, I did not take every tree. I took every other tree, every third tree, and I dropped them as good as I could, preferably where I wanted to put them. But I did about a half acre, so I did 2 half-acre spots. That's enough. That creates all of this edge all the way around. And I put both of them in a specific location so that they can meander from that bedding to the food plot, to the other food plot, and back into the other bedding. And they have this natural corridor or route to go from bedding to bedding while getting some food. So, but it's not big. It's not every tree. We're not clear cutting the whole world. It's a half acre, and it's every third or every other tree that you're cutting down. And every year that regrowth regenerates, that's more browse, that's more food, that's more thick for them to hide in. And the more they use it, the more comfortable they'll get in those spots.
Yeah, and it's easy to see just about every hunter's experienced this. You wound a deer, unfortunately, and it heads right to the thickest part of your woods, and everybody knows where that thickest part is. It's the spot you can't walk through. It's the spot you typically send the little kids through when you're doing a deer drive, just because they can actually walk through there better than anybody else. We've got bedding areas at my dad's place, and I think this would happen too with some hinge cutting at some point. My younger brother Nolan actually ended up, we're pushing part of the hunting preserve, and there's spots out there that are so thick you can't walk. You can't get down on your hands and knees and crawl. You gotta figure out to either go around or go over. And Nolan ended up about 12 feet in the air climbing over brush. Not a tree, brush that had grown together, woven together, and the deer somehow run through there at 40 miles an hour. I don't know how they do it, but we all have seen that where they go to the thickest part of the woods, and they do that because that's where they're comfortable. So if you have, like you had when you bought Wits End, Kyle, wide open, it's heavy woods, it's heavy timber with a heavy canopy, but there's no underbrush. The deer aren't comfortable there. Deer are by nature paranoid schizophrenics. They think everything's coming to get them, everything wants to eat them, and they need to survive. So they pick the thickest parts of the woods. They want to be able to hear what's coming. They want to be able to see as far as they can, but still feel like they're hidden. So, like you're saying, if you get down on their level, in some of this thicker stuff, they've made paths they can see pretty good. But their level might be 3 feet off the ground. Our level's at 5 to 6 feet, depending how tall you are, area off the ground, we can't see anything. But they know how to work the thick parts, the bedding. And if you don't have that on your property, the deer aren't going to stay there, right?
Yeah, so I read an article once that said a deer that just is walking, meandering, no pressure, no pushing, no nothing, will travel 100 yards in 10 minutes. That's an average, I'm sure, but 100 yards in 10 minutes. So if your buck is showing up 5 minutes after dark, 5 minutes after legal shooting hours, or whatever way you base your time off of, but if that deer is showing up 5 minutes after, he got up 5 minutes before dark, before shooting hours. So based on 100 yards. So when I set my 2 bedding areas up, they are about 50 yards off of the food plot. And everybody talks about staging and layering their bedding. And as the years go on, I'm gonna continue with that. The does bed up front. They want to be first. The fawns bed up front. Then you usually have your yearling, 2-year-old bucks. I want to try to beat the mature bucks out to the food plot. But then you have the mature buck, and he's going to be the farthest back, 250, 300 yards back. So at 300 yards, it's going to take him 30 minutes to get. So if they all get up at the same time, I know they can't tell a clock, so don't hold that against me. But at 5:55, if they all stand up, okay, it's time to go. The does are going to be there at 6:05. The yearlings are going to be there at 6:10, and then the mature bucks are going to be there at 6:15, 6:20 at night. That's just how that works. They all get up generally at the same time. That movement all creates at the same time. But also, so what I did was I took the bedding and brought it really tight up to my food plot. And that's the reason why I get so many daylight pictures, because it's right there. Boom, they can get out there, and they're not coming to my food plot at dark. They're bedding 50 yards off, and it's 5 minutes. Boom, they're on the food plot. That's why I get so many daylight pictures. And another thing you have to think about with bedding is a deer eats, and we'll get into this a little with the food point, but the deer eat 4 to 5 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
3 of them times they don't leave their bedding. They don't leave their general area. What's that?
Preferably no. They are able to eat and survive off twig ends and browse, and they want to get that as close to home as possible. We've had situations where we've bow hunted pretty close to a bedding area, and we'll be sitting in our tree stand for 20 minutes to an hour already, and we'll see a deer stand up within range of us. We just didn't see it because it was laying down. A doe will stand up, they'll walk 50 yards, trimming on some browse and lay back down, and that's where she's staying. It's a thick enough area where she's comfortable. It's a good enough area for bow hunting, and she was comfortable with us getting in there. But most of the time, you don't want to go near your sanctuaries, right?
Yeah. So, for example, on the ridge top, the food plot is 60 yards long, and 50 yards after that, the bedding starts. And I'm not saying they're laying around that first tree, but that's where it starts. So at the shortest route, they're going to be 50 yards away. I access from the complete opposite side, coming up a hill. I never crest that hill.
Mm-hmm.
So if that doe is bedded right next to that first hinge cut tree, and she's bedded underneath that, she's just straight line watching that food plot, and she can see it. She'll never see me access because I'm 110 yards away at shortest. I'm accessing below a hill, never cresting the hill until I'm actually up in my tree stand. So when you do that, you want to keep that distance, because if they see you come in there, you're busted.
Mm-hmm.
If they hear you come in there, you're busted. And if you go and punch through that sanctuary, they're not going to stay there. That's their safe zone. That's the safe place. If you just go walk through there to get to your tree stand, it's all shot. They're gonna bail. They'll reuse that someday, but it won't be today or tomorrow or the next week, and it'll take too long for them to adjust back for you to hunt it again if you blow through it. So, but if a buck can get up, walk 100 yards, and eat that woody browse and that growth, and then lay right back down and never leave his bedding, he's the safest person. He's the safest deer out there.
Mm-hmm.
Going out and traveling hundreds of yards, going out to wide open food plots and stuff, that's a risk they're taking, and they're willing to take that risk as the night falls.
Yeah.
So at 3:00 in the afternoon, when they want to eat and they can get up and browse, they're going to stay right there. So getting that, you don't want it so close that you bust them out every time.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, 50 yards off the food plot's 60 yards. I'm accessing from the opposite side. I'm using the hillside, the crest of the hill, topographic. I'm using everything to my advantage to keep me as far away from them as possible, but still within 5 minutes of the doe getting up, walking onto the food plot. So I'm gonna get the earliest photos possible. I have a micro plot up on the north end.
Mm-hmm.
And I all the time get pictures of deer at 1:00 in the afternoon, at 3:00, at 11:00. My nicest buck hangs out up there. It's actually the best hunting spot.
Mm-hmm.
It's thick.
Yeah.
I can't get to it easily. The right wind, the south wind, some situations I will be able to hunt it, but I got to walk right past them. It's not as nice as what I created on the south end. So they know that. So they enjoy it. So they get up, they walk 10 feet, and they're probably bedding right there. So that's a stand. I can't go walk in, hang my tree stand, and sit over the food plot with my bow and watch. Because I just scared everything. I just educated. They might not even get up, but they're not going to get up until they watch me leave.
Yeah.
So that's really important. I know that stand is the better spot to sit, but I'm not willing to
jeopardize what you've built.
I don't want to bust them all out of there to sit there.
Yeah.
Certain situations I will be, if that buck is being really hard to nail down and I got to get really aggressive, sure. But I might go in at noon.
Yeah.
I might go in when I'm not, I might go in at noon and sit till 6 o'clock at night because I don't want to push. I don't want to risk it at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. So I might get in at 10 o'clock in the morning after they've all bedded from their morning graze and sit all day if I
Yeah.
have to get aggressive with it. But they're there for a reason. They know they're safe. They know nobody can sneak up on them. It's thick, and it's not bedding I created. That's the natural bedding up there. So, but putting that stuff close and controlling that, you don't need 10 acres of hinge cut. You don't need to ruin your forest with a hinge cut. But even one tree does 4, 5, 6 different things just with that one hinge. So
Yeah, and it creates bedding where there wasn't any before. They're going to go to the nearest place that makes them feel comfortable after or before they eat. So you want to bring that, like we've been saying, closer to the food source. Because the closer you have it to the food source, the faster they're going to get out onto the food plot. But if it's too close and you don't access it properly, now they're going to bust you. And that's just not going to help you at all. Because now they've seen you coming, they've heard you coming, or whatever, smelled you. And that's a whole nother podcast. We'll get into that another time about accessing your property properly in the future. But you really do got to have some bedding of some sort on your property, or deer just aren't going to feel comfortable there.
And what I did with my bedding areas, I made two little half-acre hinge cut minor things, and I'm going to expand on those. I'm going to layer them a little bit, but that's plans for the future. But what I created was this natural corridor where they're going to leave a bed, because they're not like humans where they leave a bed to come back to that same bed that night.
Mm-hmm.
They may meander through this whole 94 acres on my property and catch themselves at the north end. Sun's coming up. They're like, well, I like that one spot over here. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a traveling shoe salesman.
Mm-hmm.
They don't stay in the same hotel and then go out and work. They'll go this far. They'll get to Indiana,
mm-hmm.
get a hotel, then they'll drive to Oklahoma and get a hotel. And now they know their hotels that they like to stay in.
Yeah.
But they're not gonna return. They're not gonna travel all the way back and try to beat daylight or night or whatever's going on. So if they meander all the way to the north end, they're gonna know the spot they like and they're mm-hmm. gonna bed down there. But what I've done with my two that I've created, ignoring the north one, which was natural, with the two I've created this natural corridor that, as that buck meanders through this food plot, goes down the hill, meanders through that little micro plot, he's going to catch himself like, oh man, I need to lay down. I'm full. And he's going to have a bedding area right there. Boom. So he goes and crawls in there and gets all cozy.
Mm-hmm.
That next morning, he's going to get up out of that bed, go back to the micro plot, go back to the food plot on the ridge. Oh man, I better lay down. It's about 9 o'clock this morning. The bedding is closest to this side. And I've created this natural movement that they just wander. If you put 2 reveal cameras up right now, I see them at 6 o'clock here. I see them at 7 o'clock on this one.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next morning, it's the opposite. And they're probably 200 yards away. I mean, I don't know. You've seen it, 150 yards away?
Yeah, somewhere in that area. It's not crazy far where they got to burn a lot of energy to get from one to the other. But it's ideal because they can conserve energy staying in a bed, go eat, conserve your energy, chew your cud, build some fat, go stay in the other bed, and just go back and forth. And it really works very, very well.
And so as they do that, they have these 2 options, and it's really good for me to predict. He just went into this bedding last night. Where am I going to sit? I'm going to sit in the microplot because that's the first one he's going to come out of.
Mm-hmm.
That's the earliest he's going to see. I'm going to see him is at that plot, and vice versa. So I've created this natural corridor, and it's really important when you look at your plan, your property on a map, and then walk the property to look at where this bedding should be.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I said, it's got to be on the opposite end of my access. That's a key thing because if you bust them out of there, they're never going to stay there. You can't. I'm going to go in there twice or 3 times this next year. It'll be in the early winter or early spring to hinge cut to expand that layering.
Mm-hmm.
I might do it midsummer to see how the growth is, to see how last year's cut grew, and to see what this year's cut is going to do. And then I might one time, not right before hunting season. I actually haven't really been out at the property for about a month. I'm letting everything stay quiet.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe one time just to check. Maybe I put that reveal camera tight to the sanctuary because that can send me photos.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to go check that camera. So 2 to 3 times a year, I'm even anywhere close to it. The one time will be midwinter or early spring. When I go in there, I find that bed and I lay down and I go, okay, what can he see from here?
Mm-hmm.
And if I go, oh, there's my trail, there's my access to my tree stand,
Mm-hmm.
or there's my truck parked, or whatever they can see from that, I can adjust on that end, brushing, cutting, changing my route, whatever, because they laid there and they seen me.
Mm-hmm.
And every time, that's why I didn't see them or whatever. They educated them. I educated them with my access.
Yeah.
But you can't go in your sanctuary. If you go in there every time you enter to hunt, you'll never see them. They won't.
It immediately becomes not a sanctuary. So you can go in there once or twice, maybe 3 times a year. Maybe you're looking for shed antlers or you wound a deer. Those are situations where wounding a deer, you have to go in there. You have to recover that animal, which is unfortunate because you might just ruin your hunt for the rest of the season or whoever else is hunting on that property. But in the case of searching for antlers, you can blow through there quickly in the spring, look for your antlers, get out, leave it alone. Leave it alone until June or July when you're ready to go put your tactic cam out or whatever camera you have. But ideally, not one that you have to check often. If you have to have a camera there or you really want to have a camera there, get one that can send you the photos because that just works so much better because you're in and out one time. You can let it sit till the batteries run out, wait till after deer season, go grab it again. But leading up to deer season and in deer season, you want to interact with that piece of your property as little as possible. Now, if you're going to go out and do some hinge cutting and add on to your bedding area, make your sanctuary a little bit bigger. Maybe you want to cut 2 to 3 trees a year just to see how you can adjust it. Like you were saying, go in and see what they can see. Should you add a tree here? Should you add and take one away? Is it too big? Is it too small? And make adjustments. You can do that, but don't do it in August. Do it January if you're okay with the snow. If the snow's a problem, wait till May. But I wouldn't really go in there any later than May because now you're dealing with water, new plant growth, and it's just a lot harder. But try to go in there in that March area. But if you got lots of water, hip waders or walk out on top of the ice. If I remember correctly, you're telling me you did your hinge cutting in February.
Yeah, I think I went out in February. We were post holing our legs through the snow and about knee to quad deep snow. One thing I did notice, so I set my sanctuary camera out August 5th, I think, or August 4th. I went in there, brand new batteries, set it up. I'm real tight. There's one, and don't forget to let me get back to accessing the sanctuaries for the deer. But I went off a key trail that they come through. They cut through that sanctuary, and I put that camera right there, and that has been great for showing me what's going in and out of that exact trail. But that was the 5th or so of August. That's done. The batteries will die there, and when I go to hinge cut next year, I'll pull that camera.
Yeah.
Because I did it in February. The snow was deep, but when I was in there setting the trail camera, I looked at all my hinge cuts. All my hinge cuts are about a foot too tall because I was standing on snow.
Yeah.
So I went 48 inches or 40 inches off me standing on snow. So all my hinge cuts are about a foot. I would consider a foot tall. But also when your hinge cuts, there's no number. It's not 32 is where the hinge has to be. If you're going to drop it on top of on a incline, you want that hinge higher so it's level. You want layers, like your middle you would want taller. So there's room for like you said with Nolan going over this big mound of stuff, you got to crawl through. So in the middle you have it taller because these deer can sneak through there. But on the edges you want that screening and that protection on the face, so you want those to be lower. But yeah, I went in there, I looked at all my hinges, I'm like, well, they're kind of high. Oops. But that was because I was on snow in February. But that's when I had time to do it. I don't like doing it that early because we're adding extra pressure and pushing these deer in a very dangerous time of the year. They're struggling, they're starving to say the least. It's usually cold, so it's strong. It's tough on them.
And
But it
predators love winter.
yeah.
A wolf or a coyote or a bobcat that can run on top of the snow does way better than a deer with their hooves. So going in when there's lots of deep snow can be really tricky if you have a lot of predators in your area, because now you're pushing them out of where they're comfortable. They have to go where they're not comfortable, and that can be where the predators are. So yeah, it might not be that great of an idea to go in deep snow time.
I like your March. I like right before green up. Green up right before green up's a good time. Those deer have gotten up, moved around. They're starting to eat that green up woody browse stuff, and the snow is not hindering them. I did not follow that this year. I had to get in February. It's when I had time, when I was able to do this. But I also didn't do 10 acres. Did a half an acre of a little spot, and it was every third tree. So I wasn't hugely impacted. I mean, I did it for one day, and I was gone out of there, and the deer had it back to what they wanted it to be. So,
And ideally, you can group two things together there and do your antler. You're searching for antlers and your hinge
definitely.
cutting at the same time. So that late March, early April time, right before, well, where we're at, right before the water lets go in the swamp, because you're still able to get out on top of some ice. The antlers haven't fallen through that yet, and you can kind of get around some of those weather hazards that you may have without impacting the deer too much.
Yeah, and so back to the access of the deer thing. It's one thing to lay in their bed and see what they can see. But imagine you're laying in that bed, and let's skip the hunting season, but let's say there's a coyote that moves through. That deer needs to bail out of there. Now, fun story, I was hunting up in Bayfield, public land, with my brother and my dad, and I sat till 10 something in the morning, and I got bored in the tree stand, didn't see anything. So we had a fresh snow that night. So I got out, I went and I cut a trail, big track. And I was like, oh, look at that. Started following it. I followed it through a trail, up a ridge, through some thick stuff. There was no chance I was going to catch up to this deer. But at some point you realize that this deer was running and jumping. Like she was moving, and I was trailing her. I watched that deer. I watched the tracks. I come up on the tracks, and they came to a big pine, maybe 10 feet round at the base. And this was fresh snow. This is fresh tracks, right? And this deer goes around and runs around this pine tree. And she must have done it 4 or 5 times because of how many fresh tracks right there. Do, 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 do. And I walk around this tree, and I'm like, where'd the deer go?
Yeah.
I mean, funny enough, I look up in the tree, like, where'd the deer go? I'm like, okay, that's weird. This fresh track came to this tree and looped this tree multiple times, enough to like overlap tracks. But there's no tracks anywhere else. So I step out about 4 feet and I do a circle. And I step out 4 more feet and I do a circle. And I step out 4 more feet, and then I walk around on the same side that I entered. There was tracks. So she, I assume, ran to that tree, ran a circle, stopped, and jumped as far as she could before making another track, and bolted. Basically, she must have went right by me, just a couple yards away, on the other side of the thick stuff, and was gone. And at that point, she outsmarted me, and I gave up. But that deer knew it was being pressured and was bailing out of there. So my point is, if that deer's laying down and a coyote runs over the hill, that deer needs to bail. So you can't drop all this stuff and make an absolute mess where the deer can't get inside. It's useless. That edge is still good. Them deer are going to use that edge. But if they're standing there and that coyote comes over the hill, they want to turn and escape basically the back door, the back exit. So them bedding areas need to have these routes. And so what I did on my one was I dropped enough that kind of made a mess. And I took that chainsaw, and I knew where their trail was because obviously the snow. And I hogged that out with the chainsaw and kept that trail fluid. So now this main drag through the bedding had these outlets on each side. So if she was laying down and a coyote runs over the hill, she can turn, go down that main trail, and then cut right or left any of these outlets and get thick between them, between her and that coyote.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what that doe did that I tracked. She ran around that tree because you couldn't see her. I don't know. Dylan, you always say these deer are not smart.
They are, but they aren't.
There's a
They
survival instinct,
yes.
which I think we get confused with deer are smart because
Hmm.
of survival. But what she did there was impressive to say the least, jumping 10 feet away, and I couldn't find the track.
Yeah.
Luckily, did some circles, but she got away because of that.
Yeah, she
So,
was able to delay you long enough. And whether she was jumping to delay you or deer jump, and they can jump
yep,
really far. A lot of people say, oh, they can jump 8, 10, 12 feet in the air. No, they can jump really far. They can clear a highway in a single bound, but they're not going to jump straight up really any higher than 6 feet, especially a bigger bodied deer. Your younger does and fawns, they can jump really high. But she took off. She needed to get away. She took off. The fastest thing they can do is to jump.
yep,
And now it leaves no scent. It leaves no tracks. She doesn't know how you're following her. She just knows you're following her. She can hear you. I'm assuming
yep.
you're not near as quiet as she is. So they can figure it out.
And that's the important thing with bedding is creating that edge so they can travel,
Hmm.
which is good. So with these deer, well, you're saying the jumping thing, right? They can jump far, but she knew I was there. She knew I was following her, and she got out of dodge that way. But it's really important that you give these bedding areas edging. But if you want them to use the inside and outside, you want them to use that, you need to give them ins and outs. If you just make a total mess
Hmm.
and just leave it, they'll just use the outside and you're not gaining everything you could be gaining with it. So,
Yeah. And so we're going to dip into deer farming here for a second. In our experience with deer farming, we would put up, well, okay, most of our pens after a lot of usage don't have underbrush anymore. The deer have eaten it all, they've killed it all. Just doesn't exist. So they don't have that natural underbrush to hide in. But we would put up buildings, and they maybe were buildings for hay storage. So Dad originally started with a 3-sided building for hay storage, and the deer really wouldn't use it because it's 3 sides. They don't have more than one option to escape. If something comes in through the front of the building, they don't want to go. They want to be able to leave away from it. So even though the front of the building is maybe 30 feet, that's not necessarily enough space where they really feel comfortable to escape, to get away. Yes, it'll keep them out of the snow. It'll keep them out of the negative 40-degree temps. They have a nice soft bed of hay instead of ice. But unless they're more bottle-fed tame or something like that, they really would not like to use that. The more wild the deer is, the less they like to use those type of situations. But at one point, Dad was either building a new building or taking tin off of the building he had. I don't remember. But he ended up with, and it's just a pole shed. So you get your purlings, and then you take the tin off. Your purlings are 2 foot on center, so there's a 2 foot gap in between
what are you saying?
purlings.
Pearl, like a pearl, like a pearl necklace?
Purlings. That's what we've always called them. I don't even know how to spell it, but that's what
Purlin.
we call them. We call them purlings.
Purlins.
We stick a
Purlin.
G in there. Welcome to Minnesota.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's just
Or maybe it's just me. I don't know. I've always thought they were called purlings, but
cool whip. Cool whip.
yep.
All right, go ahead.
Anyway, so they're 2 foot on center, right? You're hanging your tin. But now that left a 3-sided building with only 2 full sides with tin, and then you have one side that's got these purlins on it every 2 feet, and you got probably 10 feet in between your poles. 2x4 purlings. I can't say purlins. That's wrong. Sorry. But now the deer would start to use it more. Even in the summer, they'd use it more. Bucks in full velvet antler would use it. Dad went out one time, and he was going in through the front, and he jumped a 170-inch buck in full velvet in that building. And he took off running and cleared right through the purlings. Right through it, never touched them. So even though it looks really thick, it looks like you should not be able to fit there. These bucks can still do it. Even with a full set of velvet antlers, they can get through things that you don't think is possible. We've all seen deer run through the woods. But now imagine running through the woods and you have soft antlers on your head that hurt if they hit stuff and you can't touch anything. Or else you'll cut them, you'll damage them, you'll hurt them. And they can do it without touching a branch. But there is a common misconception. People think deer are taller than they really are. An average white-tailed deer is not 48 inches tall to the back. I've talked to guys all the time. They're like, "Oh yeah, it's 48 inch, deer 48 inches tall." We'd bring our big bucks to shows, and the guys would come up and, your deer are shorter than the deer I hunt. And we'd ask them, "Well, how tall the deer you hunt?" Every time, 48 inches. Every single time they'd hold their hand at 48 inches, they'd be like, "Yeah, that's a big deer." Okay, well, if you think you got a big deer, I'm gonna get a little bit off track here, but if you think you got a big deer, or your buddy shoots a big deer, you can really mess with them because deer aren't 48 inches tall. He shoots a big buck. It's laying in the back of a pickup, right? Now take that buck and just be like, "Hey, something's weird here. Something's wrong." Just mess with your buddies. It's fine. They'll get over it eventually. And then take and push the front shoulder up against one fender well. The front foot's never going to touch that other fender well because it ain't 48 inches. That's 48 inches between fender wells. It's not going to touch it. And you just be, "Hey, I know what's wrong with this deer that you shot. It's a midget deer. It's a short deer. That's why you're able to get it." An average whitetail deer is 38 to 42 inches tall at the back. They are just not 48 inches tall. They look big from a distance, but if you take your head and you go hold it at just about 48 inches in the woods, it's pretty tough to see through there.
Yep.
Move it down another 10 inches, you can see through everything. Almost no matter how much underbrush is there. And that's why when you're laying down in the deer beds, you're seeing from their perspective. Their perspective is not 48 inches and up. It's lower. The biggest buck we ever had on the farm stood 42 inches tall to the back. We didn't harvest him. We actually butchered him. He was a bottle-fed buck, but he was getting old, and we had to put him down. We butchered him when he was 11 years old, 12 years old. In late August. He hadn't polished his antlers yet. He weighed 280 pounds in late August. He's not even in rut. That's nothing. Very little body weight. They say on average a deer gains an extra third of their body weight when they go into rut. So that means in his prime, was he pushing 400, 420, 450? Massive bodied deer, 42 inches tall to the back.
Yeah.
But you got to look at things from their perspective. If you can see at 6 feet for 100 yards in your woods, 20 yards, 30, 40 yards, they're not very comfortable there. If you get down to their perspective and they can see farther, but you can't see above that, that's where they like to be. And that's where hinge cutting comes in, setting your property up properly with bedding.
Yeah, and I got in a discussion one time when I was setting on my food plot about building these berms with the brush and basically creating this in and out situation. They can enter here, but you control where they exit because you put so many berms up. And I really didn't like that. Kind of to your 3-sided building thing. I do have berms, and if you look on our social medias on Facebook, TikTok, even our introductory video where we're out on the food plot, you can see this berm that's built from the debris, and my tree stands in the middle of it. I didn't do 3 sides. I did one side. I did the long side, but it created this natural, like, hey, don't come here because that's my access point. That's where I park. That's where I'm coming in. I don't want any deer for any reason to come off the food plot and come towards my access. So I did do a berm, but I did not do 3 sides because of what you explained. I don't want that deer to stand in the middle and look around and go, I can't get out of here. Or what'll happen with a deer is a deer normally, in my opinion, this is my opinion, will not cover their same track that day. So if they come through on this route and something freaks them out, they're not going to turn around and go down that same trail. And the reason that is if there's a bobcat, a wolf, a coyote, a bear, a predator, a hunter trailing them, and they get spooked by a leaf and they turn around and run down the trail, they're going to be nose to nose to that predator. Will they bail and circle around and get back to point A? 100% absolutely every time. But they will not backtrack their trail. So if they come in from my left on my food plot and they get to the middle and they get spooked by me, by something, they're not going to turn around and if I have 3 sides bermed up, they're not going to bail. They're not going to bail out of here for that same route because of that reason. Yeah. So they're going to look for other exit points. So I do have a berm. It's the whole length of the one side, and then I do have a pile of brush on the opposing side 35 yards away. But what I've noticed is I fenced in my trees. It's created this, like, my left half is open, and I have this little opening to my right. None of the deer ever leave and go to the right. per my cameras, per what my cameras show, but they will not travel the whole length of the food plot and go through this skinny, what I would call a choke point.
Yeah.
That's scary to them.
Absolutely.
They're going to come in tight to this berm and exit around the fence on the left side because that's the closest exit.
Mm-hmm.
And then they meander their way down to the other food plot. But they won't, even though the shorter track is to this choke point, they don't like that.
No, they don't like being confined like that when they are in that paranoid schizophrenic stage.
Yep. And now that fence is temporary. That fence is just to protect my trees for basically another year and a half, 2 years before so the deer don't just mow it down to nothing.
Yeah.
So that will be naturally how that won't always be there.
Yeah.
But I've noticed that fence up right now, they don't like that. So if that was berm, if I'd have committed to a berm on that green fence,
mm-hmm.
I'd have probably limited the usage of my food plot because they came in like they are right now and they would have left to my left.
They wouldn't have gone into your food plot. They wouldn't have gone in quite as deep because it's not safe.
Yes. And I have planted some fruit trees, apple trees to my right so that if they want the good stuff, they have to commit and they give me this long time 60-yard walk that I can try to get. They'll present me a shot on. If they want the good stuff, they have to make that trek.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 5-year thing though. We'll get into that with food and everything else like that. But with bedding, they don't like being choked up. They want multiple exits. They want a main run through the middle of it so they can bail out of there and confuse or disorient the hunter, the bobcat, the coyote or wolf.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you get in there, you don't know where they went.
Yeah.
And they can haul. If they delay you for a minute going, which way did he go? There are hundreds of yards, half a mile away. They're out of dodge. So if you do this bedding, make sure there's ways to get in and out. Make sure your middles are somewhat tall.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that hinge should be at about 5 feet. And as you work your way to the edge, you should get lower.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're saying, 32, 36, break up that visual. But what we do with 10 Point or our consulting is we'll actually do that work for you.
Yeah.
If you're not used to chainsaws or not comfortable with taking down 60-foot trees with your chainsaw, we can do the consulting and then you can hire us to come in and do these minor or major hinge cuts for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be there, you can help us and you can see what we're doing and why we're doing it. But we can come in there with the chainsaws and do that work and establish those bedding areas. Make sure those trails are right. Make sure those accesses are right and exits are right.
Mm-hmm.
And get you set up with that. And then all I'm going to say when I'm walking away is now stay out of there.
Yeah.
Stay out of there. Don't go in there. Call me in April and you can go out. Call me in March and you can go back in there. But right now, just stay out of there.
You got to leave them alone.
Yep. But it is good to go in there once, like we talked about.
Yeah.
Check last year's growth, last year's cut in the growth, this year's cut in the growth, just to see what did work, what didn't work. Is it getting overgrown? You can go into a cut that's 5 years old and go recut these exits and accesses out for them deer because they will get overgrown. The sun's beating down, the growth's happening, they'll get too thick for usage, and then they'll just be using that edging, and you don't want that. You want to make use of all of that space.
Yeah.
So, but we can help, and if people want us to come in there and do that manual work for you, we're willing to do that, and willing to make sure it's done right, and then let you have at her during hunting season.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think that's kind of where we're going to end tonight. I think we covered that pretty good. We're 40-some minutes in. So, So if you want to get a hold of us, you can find us on Facebook at 10 Point Whitetails. You can find us on TikTok at 10 Point Whitetails. You can find us on Instagram at 10 Point Whitetails. You can find us on YouTube, again, at 10 Point Whitetails. We're pretty consistent with that anyway. Podcast, you can find us on Spotify or Anchor Podcasts, and hopefully other podcasting sites at some point here too. Shoot us a Facebook message if you got questions. We'd love to answer questions on the podcast. We're hoping to get to that point soon. I think that's about it. Like, share, subscribe. Leave us a rating on your podcast apps. Leave us a rating on Facebook. All these things are good to do, and it helps promote us and helps us get the word out to more people, because we want to educate. We have a lot of experience and knowledge to share. So thank you guys for watching. And again, this episode is sponsored by Wallhanger Taxidermy of Cable, Wisconsin. And Kyle, looks like you had one more thing there.
Yeah, I just want to say that I just looked at our Facebook page and we are at 1,924 followers.
Wow, we
I'm
picked
going to
up.
ask anybody that's listening to this or watching this, if you haven't liked the page, go like the page. I'll try to pull up some sort of fun thing to do at 2,000, maybe a giveaway. We did a giveaway for seed,
Yeah.
but we're past fall planting. But if we can get to 2,000, which is 76 more follows, maybe we'll try to do something fun to celebrate 2,000 followers on Facebook. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea. But as we are pre-recording these podcasts, if we hit 2,000 before this episode, we will do it once this episode drops. How about that?
There we go.
So
Fair enough.
You got to like this you got to go on there, check it out to be involved, but we're going to wait until this episode drops for the 2,000 follower giveaway if we hit 2,000. If we don't hit 2,000 before that, we'll do it afterwards, but
Sure.
yeah.
Sure.
So, yeah, thank you guys for listening. We appreciate it. And we hope to hear from you soon. Oh yeah, you can check out our email, Send us an email. Send us some questions at 10pointwhitetails@gmail.com. And that is 10, not TEN, 10.whitetails. I think we covered all the bases.
Perfect. Until the next one.
Sounds great. We'll see you guys next Friday.